Greetings, Earthlings. My name is Liz Colby. I'm with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and accompanying me behind the scenes and providing technical support is Phoebe Eichhorst. We will shortly be joined by Sam Oswald-Tilton and Peter Seeley, friends in farming, machinery, and a penchant for the fantastic. Today, Sam and Peter are at Springdale Farm, run by Peter and Bernadette Seeley near Plymouth, Wisconsin. If you were with us last week, you know our video quality suffered from the intergalactic attacks of rural broadband buffering. So today, in an effort to evade such treachery, Sam and Peter will be live from the cockpit of Peter's living room, armed with videos, photos, and as much steel as they could carry inside. But first, like an old movie, we start with the credits at the top. I'd like to thank our organizing partners for their work on this field day. The Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day is an annual event held on farms across the exotic galaxies of Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and in 2021, the deep space of Iowa. This event brings together vegetable farmers, field crop farmers, and industry reps to demo and discuss the latest in field cultivation equipment. We're glad to be joining virtually this year, but look forward to seeing you all in person next September. The Land Connection is a nonprofit based out of Champaign, Illinois. The Land Connection trains farmers in resilient, restorative farming techniques, informs the public about the sources of our food and why that matters, and works to protect and enhance farmland so that we, and generations to come, will have clean air and water, fertile soil, and healthy, delicious food. Learn more at thelandconnection.org. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a farmer-led nonprofit based out of Ames. We specialize in farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing and farmer-led research with a mission to equip farmers to build resilient farms and communities. All are welcome at PFI, and we invite you to learn more about our organization and access our vast collection of resources at practicalfarmers.org. This field day will run until 1:10 p.m. If you have questions for Sam and Peter during the field day, please type them into the comment box on Facebook, and I will do my best to relay your questions through the void of space and the internet. Also, at the conclusion of this event, please give us your feedback via the online survey. We'll post the link in the comment box. Virtual events are new to us this year, and with your help, we're excited to learn and improve throughout the summer because we're still virtual going into the winter. And now I'm going to turn the helm over to Sam for a couple more sponsors, and then to the meat, or steel that is, you all came here to see. Sam?
Hi everyone, my name is Sam Oswald-Tilton. Welcome to the Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day. And sitting next to me is a very special guest I'll introduce in just a moment. This is the fourth year of the field day. We bring together farmers, researchers, and companies from all over the world to share and learn about weed control methods and tools. And one of my favorite parts of organizing the field day is meeting so many wonderful people. So hello to all of you out there. I'm sorry that I cannot greet you in person, but I hope to next year. Just like for many of you, there's been a lot of changes to the field day this year as we rolled with the COVID punches. Eric Franzenberg from Iowa was initially slated to host the field day, and he put in a lot of time preparing for that. And Hans Bishop in Illinois also helped out a lot planning to host on-farm demos, which in the end we weren't able to do. But nevertheless, thank you to those two engaged and generous farmers. Hopefully you can tell that this field day, even a virtual one, takes a lot of planning. And we could not run an event like this without the monetary support of our sponsors. And I want to acknowledge our presenting sponsors right now. Sioux Growing Supply from the ginseng fields of northern Wisconsin, offering all manner of specialty crop supplies such as soils, pots, and fertilizers. Cult Cress, precision German engineered weeding tools for all scales. Osborne Quality Seeds, independent family-owned seed dealers specializing in vegetable, herb, and flower seeds. Rodale Institute's Midwest Organic Center, providing research to support growers and expand organic acreage in the Midwest. Small Farm Works, straight out of Wisconsin, supplier of the paper chain system for fast transplanting and precision Japanese weeding tools. Sutton Ag Enterprises, custom made and imported specialty crop equipment from seeders to harvesters, including weeding tools. Tillmore, American-made precision weeding tools, as well as tractors and other machinery for small farmers. The Treffler Company and Manet Machine, suppliers of innovative agricultural machines, including the unique Treffler Tine Weeder, and our media sponsors who help get the word out. Growing for Market Magazine, for local food producers to keep you informed about the business of growing and selling vegetables, fruits, flowers, plants, and herbs. And Vegetable Growers News, along with Organic Grower Magazine, national magazines to keep you informed on all issues affecting vegetable and organic growers. Okay, now that we've helped to pay the bills, I can welcome you to the main event. Ladies and gentlemen, From the beautiful, glacially sculpted Kettle Moraine Hills near the shore of Lake Michigan, welcome to Springdale Farm. We're coming to you from the inner sanctum of Springdale, the cerebral hub from which decisions are made, deals are cut, and when the internet connection in the field is terrible, the cave of cultivation from which virtual field days are presented. I have the pleasure today of sitting with Peter Seeley, a friend and mentor of mine, and a mean ultimate Frisbee player, by the way. And one of the first CSA farmers in the Midwest who has been growing vegetables for over 30 years here in this valley. And Peter was kind enough to agree to take some time to run through some pictures and videos on weeding tools on his farm this season, as well as some videos from tools from other farms as well. Peter and I are here at your disposal, and this is an interactive event. So as we're going through these cultivation concepts, please type any questions into the chat, and Liz will ask those questions of us on your behalf. And before we begin, Peter was nice enough to pour me a stiff drink of apple cider, and I'm just going to wet my whistle here. So last week, we were in the tool shed, and we were talking about adjustments to be made to seeders and weeding tools before getting out into the field. And this week, we want to talk about tools in the field. And even though we're not in the field ourselves, there's a certain checklist or order of operations when we get a tool in the field that we can assess what it's doing and how we might need to adjust it. One of the first questions to ask when we get a tool out into the field is how established is the crop? Peter, when you pull a basket weeder or a tine weeder, what are you looking for to see how successfully you might be able to use that machine or how aggressively you can set it?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that the best weed to eradicate is one that's hardly germinated, that you can hardly see. So you obviously want to get into the field as quick as possible. In fact, some techniques are pre-emergent, so you can even do some cultivating before the actual crop appears. And obviously, if the crop is really young, it's going to be a lot more tender, so you have to be less aggressive than it would be when the crop is older. Crops vary, of course, too. You have to know the crop that you're dealing with. You know, something like lettuce or spinach is going to be a lot more tender than something like beans or the brassicas. And then you got to look at your soil too. You got to see if it's a heavier soil, if it's going to have a crust on it, what it's going to take to get through that crust without damaging the crop. If you've got sandier soils, then you can have a lot more leeway in how you can aggressively work on the weeds then.
What are some of the options, Peter? One of the main problems I've seen in fields and with different tools is that crust. You know, after a rain, it starts to dry out. The top of the soil starts to knit together, and as it dries, that crust gets deeper and deeper. And you know, tools, it's harder and harder to get them to penetrate. How do you deal with a crust that gets harder and harder in terms of the tools that's possible to use?
Yeah, that's it. That can be a big problem. You know, obviously long term, you work on managing your soil organic matter so that you're not going to have that problems as much. We've seen a big difference in our fields as we've applied compost over the years. That we have a lot less of a crust issue than we had otherwise. The tool that you use, you know, to break it, you got to be careful because, you know, there will be larger clods that will ruin your crop. So if you can bite off, you know, smaller amounts of it, either with something like a basket weeder that's going to hit it every couple inches, or that your sharpened beet knives or whatever other knives, you know, can slice through, but without overturning huge chunks of soil that will, again, ruin your crop. Find soil that doesn't crust over if that's your main problem.
Sage advice here. That's $1 million advice. Another big thing to think about, I think, when you get out into the field is the density of your weeds. And there's all sorts of weed management techniques, you know, before you even plant in terms of rotations to lower the density of weed seeds in your soil. But once you get out there, you know, seeing a carpet of weeds versus a smattering here and there can make a big difference. And I know, Peter, I was at your place, I think in May, and a lot of times we were thinking about, you know, basket weeding twice or tine weeding twice based on the density of the weeds. What kind of things do you think about when you look at weed density and whether you can save a crop, whether you need to replant, whether you're cultivating, you know, a second time?
Yeah, of course, it's hard to make general rules. Just out in the field, you need to observe what you do. Something that I think you mentioned that can be really good is just running through something several times. If the first time, you're only getting 70% or 80 or 90%, but there's still weeds out there, the time that it takes to run through the field with a piece of equipment, is very minimal compared to the amount of time that would take hand weeding those same crops later. So yes, you possibly can do some damage to the crops going it through a second time, but usually it's worth considering doing that, especially if you have a crust and it's kind of broken up through the first pass through the field. Then the second time you can do that much more fine weeding with getting the weeds out.
That's something I think we'll see in some of our videos, is going through the field and depending on the tool, having clods left over, of varying sizes. And a lot of times you can have weeds left over that are still rooted in those clods, and there's still their own distinct masses of soil, and they have soil moisture, and they can hold that soil moisture for a few days before rain. And the more that those clods can get broken up, the weeds kind of can't survive in their shadow. The other thing that sometimes is a problem with greater weed density is plugging up cultivators. I think some machines you can't really do anything about that. Say a basket weeder, you're not going to adjust things too much. But other tools, especially if there's sweeps or knives, if you can lengthen out the distance between those knives. So say if these are only a few inches apart, but if you can lengthen that out, residue has more space to flow in between them in terms of firing.
Yeah, good point.
I think another thing to think about, especially when people start talking about in-row weeding machines like torsion weeders, finger weeders, even tine weeders, there's different ways to kill a weed, whether it's slicing it, cutting it at the surface, whether it's burying it through some type of hilling, or whether it's uprooting it, like a sweep would do. But a lot of those in-row tools work by trying to uproot that weed. And at that point, you're not worried so much about the above ground size of the weed. You're worried about how well it's rooted. If that weed is rooted better than your crop. And a real helpful test to do when you get out to the field is maybe dig up one plant, especially a transplant, and you'll have that soil block that you put it out there with, but you can see if the roots have grown out into the soil, usually after maybe a week or 10 days. But tug on some of the crop and tug on some of the weeds and see how well they're rooted. Peter, is that something that you do very often, or what's the biggest thing that you're looking at when you're assessing, how close you can set a cultivator to a crop?
Yeah, again, each crop is going to be different, how you can manipulate it. Obviously, soil moisture, you want to, once the weeds start germinating, you want to get in there, but if it's really wet, you just have to wait. And if you wait too long and you've got that green carpet, like you say, you're going to have to be more aggressive to uproot them all. If you can do it before a nice sunny weather, that the roots exposed can be killed. If you do it just before rain, then there's a good chance that a lot of those weeds are just going to take off again.
I think another thing to say in terms of the different ways that we can kill weeds is burying weeds can be a great option. I think people are starting to kind of rediscover hilling discs and spider weeders set to hill and hilling of crops that we wouldn't normally think to hill kind of outside of potatoes and leeks maybe. And a good rule of thumb there is if you have one full leaf of your crop that's above the hilling, most times that crop can grow through that. Whereas if you're able to completely bury and kind of seal in those weeds underneath your hill, you could kill those weeds. And that's an option, if you go out there and you do a tug test and your weeds are maybe as well rooted or better rooted than your crop, but maybe shorter than your crop, well, then maybe hilling is a good option. Although I think for something like Peter's doing here with the CSA, you're growing 30 different types of crops. Sometimes it doesn't pay to get the adjustment perfect, on a run for say beets or something if 10 minutes later you got to go to something else.
It is trickier, yeah, when you have so many different crops all at different stages to hit it all exactly at the right time. Interesting example I just thought of too is peas. We grow some peas, and if I go through, let's say with a tine weeder, when they're really when they're small, just germinating, you're much more likely to damage them. Or if they're above 6 inches or so, then the tines are going to drag them out. but there's that sweet spot in the middle there when they're just a couple inches tall that you can go through and clean up the bed. So how big the crop is can make a big difference on when you get in there and what tool you use.
That's something Hans Bishop was talking about. He's had a heck of a summer down there with too much rain and not enough rain. And, you know, he's invested in a lot of nice weeding tools and set them up well. But he was saying that he realized if he's so busy that he can't use them, the timing is everything. He was saying he would rather have a poorer quality tool used at the right time than the perfect tool used, you know, 2 days later, where those weeds have just gotten big enough where even the nicest finger weeder, you know, can't flick those out. Whereas, you know, maybe a tine weeder or just some sweeps could have gotten in there.
And I know this is about mechanical cultivation, but that's puts a plug in for a flame weeder, because flame weeder you can often get in when it's way too muddy to do any actual soil cultivation.
Oh yeah, good point. Then in terms of running a tool through the field and adjusting it, I think someone gave me this advice about fixing cars years ago, probably someone here on the farm here, that I really appreciated, which was try and fix the easiest thing first, or assume it's the easiest fix first. So before you go ripping the engine out, you know, maybe it's just an electrical issue or a fuse to replace or something. And I think the same helps to think about adjusting a weeding tool, where if I need to get more or less aggressive, it's good to start with the easiest adjustment first. You know, I don't want to jump out of the tractor seat with a wrench. You know, the easiest way to make a tool more or less aggressive generally is speed. So instead of even getting out of the seat, I can just bump up the speed or lower down the speed and see what's happening. Is that something you use a lot, Peter, depending on different tools?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the other big one is the working depth of the tool. And that's one that you can be a lot more aggressive with, but at the same time, if the soil is too moist, that you might get locked out of a field if you can only work, say, 4 inches is the shallowest you can go. But if you have tools, you know, say here's a sweep that's incredibly shallow to the ground. Thanks, Peter. You know, you can get in and work the soil just an inch or two down. So whereas if you could only work at 4 or 6 inches, you couldn't get into that field. Having tools that work shallowly will let you get in there pretty quickly. Okay. Anything else on those, Peter? Can we start looking at some slides?
No, let's jump right in.
Okay. Phoebe, if you pull up that first slide, Peter had me out to the field in May, and where are we here? And we were tine weeding onions, and he had direct seeded and transplanted onions, and you can see by the foliage on the trees, you know, it's still pretty early spring, but those onions had pretty good size on them. And here we are looking at the field after we had tine weeded, I think, the first time. And if you go to slide number 2, you can see what the soil conditions were like. And there's my gloved hand in the bottom. And so you've got those transplanted onions, you know, maybe 6, 8 inches tall. And you've also got some weeds, and they're not very dense, but they're still a few inches tall. And Peter, can you say anything about the soil over there? There's a bit of a soil crust.
Yeah, it's a little bit heavy, not super heavy, but yeah, you can see it does crust over, so it has to be broken up.
And if you go to the third slide, Phoebe, you can kind of see a close-up there on the soil surface. So Peter does an incredible job, I think, of making and applying compost, and you can see some of the residue there, and you can also see some of the weeds coming. And this was a pretty good time, I think, to bring out the tine weeder. Of course, you know, earlier may have been better, but it also may have been too wet, and the density of weeds isn't too bad.
Yeah, in general, with the tine weeder that we're going to go through here, I would choose to go through there before the weeds are that big, because the tine weeder is not going to really get those.
Hey, Sam, can I get you to, I just want you to turn the computer a little bit closer to Peter so we can pick up his audio a little bit better. I think your voice is carrying a little better than his. There you go.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, Peter was just saying that in general, he prefers to get in there sooner before the weeds are that big, but I'm guessing maybe some of the rain had prevented that. We started to come through with the tine weeder, and we were playing around with the aggressiveness. You know, some of the newer tine weeders, like the Treffler, the adjustments are really easy. You can do everything at once. But we were using a Lely style tine weeder where we adjust each one individually. And I think we tried 1 or 2 different adjustments, but it takes, you know, so long to adjust each of them. We ended up mostly playing around with the speed. And if you go to the next slide, Phoebe, you can see what the the soil conditions look like after we had been through twice. Peter, would you say, just from that picture, what you think about that tool, if you're happy with what it did or not?
Sure, yeah, no, you can see that it did disturb all the soil. The crust did get broken up, and it did a pretty good job in eradicating the weeds that had just started there. Even the ones that were a little bigger, it pretty much. Did we go through that one twice?
That one was twice.
Yeah. Yep.
And you can see, I mean, the onions Peter does a good job with healthy soil and consequently healthy plants. You know, those onions are big and I think they're well rooted. And the next one we could pull up, if you'd like, Phoebe. Speaking of tine weeders, we've got a video of one of these newer tine weeders that are available. This one's a Trefler tine weeder. And this is in Spinach, I believe. And I think the first thing to note when this video comes up is the texture of the soil. These are promotional videos, and you'll notice that tine weeders work best when the soil texture is loose and friable. Our soils with more clay that crust, some of these newer tine weeders, you can adjust them real well to break through that and leave your crop, but they're going to work well on a soil that's a little sandier or more open. And here we can see more established spinach. And Phoebe, I think you could start the video if you'd like. The big difference here on these Trefler tine weeders is that each spring has each tine, is controlled by an individual spring. Peter and I took a little bit of time to play around with one of these tiny Treflers that are hand powered in his field. And what was your experience with that, Peter?
Well, I obviously like the 3-point model better. I don't have to drag it through the field. But for smaller acreages, these tiny, they cover 30 inches, I think, is the width. Although we used over our 2-meter or 6-foot beds, just going down one side and back the other, so that can be done too. But yeah, even this bed here, you see it's got a little bit of a contour. The way they make the bed, it seems like this. I think pretty sure this is in Holland, and they get a lot of rain there, so they kind of like it that they want to roll off the beds. But yeah, this particular tine weeder, it's able to independently keep the same tension on the soil, even if the soil is not uniform. So that's we've owned several different tine weeders, and we found several advantages to the Trefler that to make it more adaptable and versatile.
The big thing I noticed in using it is, in my experience with kind of conventional tine weeders, if there's any type of crust, you have to adjust it, very aggressive to break through the crust. And then it goes in deeper than you want and starts pulling out plants, and it's really hard to hit that sweet spot. And what I was struck with when we were using this tiny Trefler with you a few weeks ago is you could adjust it to break through the crust, but no more. So we were moving a minimal amount of soil.
And that adjustment is just a single adjustment in the tension of the tines. It's not adjusting each tine separately, which, frankly, we had one of those tine weeders for years and years, and I almost never took the time to adjust them all individually. So, but it makes a big difference. If you can adjust it, like when the spinach is, smaller, you're going to have to do it with less tension on there, with less pressure on there. And then when spinach is bigger, you can put a little more pressure on. But it's nice to be able to do that immediately. And
so that's an example of a tine weeder in direct seeded crops. Phoebe, if you pull up the next video, it's a tine weeder in kale. There's a lot of fancy in-row tools, but one thing I think that shouldn't be forgotten that's nice about tine weeders is they're kind of quick and dirty. A lot of farmers talk about not having enough employees trained on these weeding tools. So it's like if the operator can't find the time to do it, it doesn't get done. I know Chris Blanchard used to always say he liked the tine weeder because of how easy it was. He could just tell someone to jump on a tractor, and watch out for killing the crop, but it was easy enough to
right.
use.
Yeah, that's true. And you can go real fast too, so you can really cover a lot of acreage.
So you could play that one, Phoebe. This is, again, a full type model, but, plenty of tractor mounted options out there. And this is on kale. You can see the kale was probably transplanted just a few days previous, and the full bed width is getting work there. But again, I would be pretty happy with the texture of the soil. I mean, it looks pretty light and sandy. So that's what we think about with tine weeding. So those were pictures from May at Peter's place with transplanted onions. And then here, a more modern version of a tine weeder with a few more sort of helpful bells and whistles in direct seeded spinach and kale. There's one other interesting sort of timed tool, and Phoebe, if you could pull up the whisker weeder video. This is a tool from Japan, and it's a type of torsion weeder. And we saw torsion weeders in Europe, and now the Tillmore company's making them here. They're available from other European companies. And the torsion weeder are two pieces of metal, and instead of pushing down into the soil, they push against the crop row. And you can adjust them just right so that as they pull through the soil, they push away when they meet a crop, but they snap together again in between crop. And so sometimes they can do fantastic work, but I think the real limitation with this tool is soil crusting. And you can see in the video, here it's showing the different parts of the machine. And Phoebe, feel free to go back so we can see it running in the field again. The real problem is soil crusting here. And you can see that what this grower did, it looks like, is went through beforehand with some sort of between row tool to break the soil crust as close to the row as possible, and then let the whisker weeder, torsion weeder just work, you know, that final inch or two right next to the row. And that's kind of your high-priced real estate. You know, most tools can get close enough to the row, but if you can start reaching in the row, that's where it really pays off for hand weeding. Peter, could you say anything in general just about hand weeding? I know you have people weed by hand, you have people on carts. You've really looked into a lot of different ways to do hand weeding over the years.
Boy, I don't know. Do as little of it as you can. Obviously, when it's soil's moist after a rain, that's often the first thing that we'll do, go out hand weeding before you can get out there with a tractor, because you know, you can walk through your fields, but you can't drive through, and the weeds come out really easily. So the right moisture level makes it a ton easier.
Mm-hmm. So these were tools we were looking at that can go right over the row because of how they contact the plant. But there's also tools that get extremely close to the row. And so the next video is from Hans Bishop down in Illinois, and he grows a fair amount of carrots for storage and sells them through the winter. And Hans has this bottomland soil that also gets sort of a crust. And so Phoebe has just that still pulled up, and we'll see the farming credit of some of you guys out there. If you can pick out the carrots in that field, they can be kind of hard to see because there's a decent density of weeds, specifically grass weeds. But now if you push play, Phoebe, we'll see how Hans's well-adjusted tool is able to get very close to the row. And this particular tool is a cutaway disc. And so there's a gauge wheel up front and the cutaway discs, and right behind them sort of beat knife. And you can see, Peter was saying earlier that the problem with the soil crust is those clods, and you can see them laying on the top of the soil. And if you have a sweep or something go through, it can pull out a clod that includes the plants in the row. But what these cutaway discs are able to do is deal with a soil crust very well by literally cutting the soil next to the row and shaving it off. So whereas hilling, we might have them angled like this to throw soil in, but these discs are angled the opposite way to pull soil away.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. Now, we've got one more video of this type of tool from Hans, and this one is in Brussels sprouts, but I think the field day owes him big money because it looks like he sacrificed his phone in the interest of quality footage. So this is Hans and Brussels sprouts. And again, costing us big bucks. Thank God we got these sponsors here. And you can see the plants are quite small. I'm imagining he transplanted them, you know, maybe a week before or something. And you can see a fair amount of weeds. I think there's amaranth and whatnot. And they're smaller than the Brussels sprouts, but there's a decent density. And you can start the video there, please, Phoebe. And one thing you'll notice is how shallowly Hans has his tools set to run, especially with some of the rain he's had down there. He wants to be able to get into the field as soon as possible. Yep, there goes his phone. Anyhow, I think another thing to think about with weeding tools is the configuration, is the closeness of your rows. So for example, Hans used to plant a fair few things in 5-row configuration, but realized that he just didn't have enough space to cultivate. And so now a lot of his things are 3-row. So Brussels sprouts maybe would normally be 3-row, but even carrots are things that he could space closer together. he widens out for his tools. Peter, could you say anything about row spacing? I mean, you've tried so many different things over the years with so many different crops. What are the things you think about when you decide how many rows
Right.
per bed?
Well, if you're limited on land, you obviously want to put in as much as you can. So we would, and that was our initial situation. So if we could push it closer together, we'd add more rows to it. So, you know, we did a lot of things at 7 rows, and then we'd also go down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But I would echo that sentiment that it's harder to mechanically cultivate if things are really tight. So even though sometimes we get a higher yield in our beds if we had 7 rows of carrots, we can weed a much better if we could do just 4 rows. The amount of, again, if you're really short on land, then you just want to get as much you can, because with all these vegetable crops, you know, your overall income per acre is quite high. But if you have more acreage and then you can devote more mechanical weeding tools to your operation, then and it's really helpful to space them out further. And we're doing that too now that we have more land to play with also.
Is that right, Peter, that depending on how you're going to use the vegetable, you might plant a different spacing? Like if it's say a fresh market cabbage instead of a storage cabbage?
Well, yeah, with a lot of crops, yeah, your spacing will determine your size. If you plant carrots, for example, really close together, then you're going to get baby carrots. You're not going to get the full-grown carrots. Sure.
So one of these companies was nice enough to send us a machine to play with this summer. And this was a rear-mounted steerable toolbar. And this is a way to get extreme precision out of these tools. It does require 2 people to use it. So that can be a drawback, but at the same time, oftentimes you can move through the field a little bit faster. So we've got a few videos showing these rear-mounted steerable toolbars. And again, it's the principles that matter. These same type of tools, you could put belly-mounted, you know, between the axles, or you could have, you know, rear-mounted with just a single driver. And Peter and I were out in the field, and his wife Bernadette was nice enough to be the camera lady. And the first video is showing us out in broccoli. If you'd pull that up, Phoebe. And we really appreciated the conditions out there, I think, because so many times people show videos of tools in perfect conditions, which, you know, looks nice, but at the same time, I think for most people, conditions aren't always perfect. And here we had some uneven soil, we had some residue, but the weed pressure I don't think was too bad. And here's Peter driving on one of his narrow-tired tractors. Now for this particular machine, we put on 2 different sizes of finger weeders. The row on your left is a larger size finger weeder, and the row on your right is a smaller size finger weeder. Oftentimes, depending on how much space you have, the larger finger weeder is able to be more aggressive. The other thing to think about, I think, is notice, and we'll look in another video too, notice that the sweep behind the tire, it's got an extra share on it, an extra piece of metal right here coming off of it. And the point is that as it moves through the soil, it can earth up or throw soil onto the edge of that bed and maintain that bed shape. A lot of times what happens over the course of a few cultivations is the bed gets torn down, and it can be nice to keep that profile so that, you know, we don't keep edging closer and closer to the plant. And Phoebe, if you go to the next movie, broccoli weeds in the row, we can see what type of weeds we're dealing with. And also, I think one thing to mention is for good weed control in your tire tracks, you need the right width of sweep. A lot of times we use a sweep that's too wide. That's probably what we had there. You can see that it's just bouncing along the surface. Because it's running behind a tire, it's going to be more compressed. And a series of smaller sweeps, you know, that are very narrow can dig in a lot better than a wide sweep that's going to try just skim on the surface. Yeah, so there you can see the weeds that we start with. The weed pressure isn't too bad, but the size is not ideal. You know, maybe 2-3 inch tall lamb's quarters and amaranth. And here we are chugging along. And again, the finger weeder, the outside row is a larger, more aggressive finger weeder, and the row on your left is a smaller, less aggressive finger weeder. One thing you can notice there is the sort of topography of the surface. We had hilled up a little bit in the middle, which I think I'd be happy with in terms of burying weeds.
You still need somebody pretty good driving the cultivator and driving the tractor and the cultivator itself. It's not like it's easy.
We make it look easy, but can you say more about that, Peter, in terms of like the training that people need for tools, or what it's like to assess when people can do a job or let them loose?
It's one of the hardest things in vegetable growing, knowing how aggressive to be without doing damage to the crop. So yeah, very few farms, do not have very experienced people running them because the risk of crop failure is too high.
Do you find that you pretty much are the one that run these tools, or you have one other person, or do you have a few people?
Yeah, there's just a limited number of people that would have the experience to know exactly how to do it.
And Phoebe, there's one more video of this rear-mounted steerable toolbar, and that's in beans. And this one, if you look further up ahead before the tool is run, you'll see a veritable carpet of small weeds. Now, the size difference between the crop and the weed, I think, was good. The beans had 2 true leaves. They were starting to canopy out. So the size difference between the crop and the weed in this next beans video was good, but the density of the weeds was the problem. There was a real carpet there. So Phoebe, that would be the next video, beans. Yeah, and what she's showing now, you can see that sweep right in the tire track, throwing soil up into the bed, but you can also see that it's working maybe a little more shallowly than we would like. So here's beans, and again, you can notice the density of the weeds up ahead as the tool runs through. Again, the more aggressive, larger finger weeders on the left, and the smaller, less aggressive on the right. Do you remember that day, Peter? You weren't very happy with what we were doing in that field, right?
Well, the weeds were way too big. It did a pretty good job anyway, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And I believe that was on sort of a hillside. The soil was more rocky and not very friable. The tools weren't really digging in very
correct,
much.
yeah. And there was some, it was on a hillside too, so it doesn't look that way, but it was hard to get it perfectly level, like you see in the promotional videos where the fields are perfectly flat and all sandy. So the tools work fantastic.
Yeah, this is great. This is the real deal. And now that you mentioned that, that's right. Me on the back, the whole tool was always skidding downhill, and I had to always go up against it. And I was asking you to drive a little bit uphill, and that's right. Yeah, so this was our best take here. We didn't show them the, yeah. Okay, so that's rear-mounted steerable toolbar. And we want to move on to another tool here that is extremely popular, and I think for good reason, and that's a basket weeder. And so there's a video here of a basket weeder we took just the other day running through cilantro, and we call this the good and the bad of basket weeders. And here you can see the rows of cilantro, and you can see the weeds that we're asking the basket weeder to take care of. And we'll watch that basket weeder go through, and then we can take a look at the work that it did. If you'd start the video, please, Phoebe. And there we've got the track scratchers. And so I'm going to reach in there with my hand, and we can see that the basket weeder did a good enough job of kind of doing between row. But if you pause, oh no, let it run another moment there, Phoebe. If you pause it maybe right about there, you can see that a lot of these weeds are still rooted, and they're big enough where it's hard for the basket weeder to uproot them. And this, I think, like you were saying, Peter, is a perfect example of when you might want to take a second pass.
Right. Especially because the bed was fairly flat, but not totally. And we're doing 7 rows there. So on one side, if it's digging in a little bit more than the other side, the baskets aren't independently mounted. It's rigid. So you've got one whole unit as together. So if your beds aren't totally flat, then you're going to have variations in how well a job it does.
Yeah, I would say maybe the main limitation of a basket weeder is you have to have really good surface preparation, and otherwise, a dip is just not going to get weeded. If you go to the next video, Phoebe, this is spinach after the basket weeder is passed over. And again, you can see kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the basket weeder, which is it works real fast and can be a pretty accurate tool. But at the same time, you can get skips. Those baskets have wires spaced, I don't know, 6-8 inches apart. And if you're not going fast enough, they'll just kind of scuff the soil instead of turning it over.
And the other thing, they recommend never using it in rocky soil, but our soil is incredibly rocky. So yeah, we got rocks stuck in there, and then the whole thing will just start snow plowing, pushing out. So that's the downside.
Yeah, we can see there's some of the smaller weeds are still rooted. And again, a second pass would take care of a lot of that. The next video, basket weeder principle of operation. I think a big thing with these tools is to have in the back of your head how they work or what they're supposed to do. And in this next video, we just kind of point out what you'll notice. There's a bigger gear there on the left and a smaller gear on the right. And so as those front baskets turn, that chain, you could start that video, Phoebe, thank you. That chain will turn the rear baskets a lot faster. And so what they should do is kind of under their own power, throw the soil. I think a common mistake with the basket weeder is running it too slowly. You kind of have to get a decent amount of speed for those rear baskets to start throwing soil. And there's one more video, I think the last one, Phoebe, of winter radishes. And these were a 7-row crop. Peter really likes to pack his stuff in there. And I thought this was just a perfect example of realistic weed control, because I look at this 7-row bed of winter radishes and I don't see a single weed. They've all, one benefit of narrow rows is that they canopy over quickly. And they had done that here on the left. You can see as winter radishes, I don't see a single weed. But as I start to move the canopy aside, you can see small weeds that are maybe a 1/2 inch tall or something. But because Peter has had timely weed control there, the canopy of the winter radishes has totally covered up those weeds, and they're not going to be a problem, I don't think. I think this is a good example of just kind of being realistic. It's not like every weed is a bad weed.
Yeah, we lucked out there, I guess.
Oh, I give you a little bit of credit, Peter. And we're winding up our time here, and the last things we wanted to look at was a few more slides, and that'd be some pictures. And that's just of the basket weeder in action. So here, if we go to slide number 5, you can see here's peas and cilantro that Peter had intercropped together. Peter, I don't often see, crops planted together. Could you say a word or two about intercropping in general, or what you're thinking?
Yeah, we don't do a lot of it. I forget exactly what the motivation was here, and it kind of worked. The cilantro was out of there by the time the peas grew up, and the peas kind of grew together. So yeah, we might even do it again.
I took this picture while Peter had asked me to go out there with the 7-row basket weeder, and I think he cringed a little bit when he saw how close I got to the peas there.
They did survive, even though it looks like they'd be pulling them out.
Yes, I think that's a good example. You can see on slide number 5 that those baskets look a little too close, and I did pull a few peas out, I can admit now, to Peter a few months later. But afterwards, after going through that bed once or maybe twice, you can see that we cleaned it up good and didn't take out too many plants. And the next slide, slide number 7, a similar example with carrots. And you can see Peter's bed prep here, I would say is fantastic, a nice level bed. You can see maybe a little bit of soil crusting, but no big clods or anything. But I think Peter looks at the seeding layout here and cringes, or how do you feel?
Just it's not uniform there. The Planet Junior seeder that we're using is 2 gangs, and one of the gangs got shifted a little bit, so it's not even equal. The basket weeder, I think, did make it through, and we didn't destroy the crop. But
so here, the next slide, slide number 8, you can see that we did a pretty good job cleaning that up. But I think that's an advertisement for doing your winter shop work of double checking where seeders and transplanters are. Yeah. So that's our last slide. And I think that's all we have for this, our 4th year of the Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day, and our first, and hopefully last, virtual version. And again, a big thanks to Peter Seeley, who has taken a lot of time out hosting us here and preparing for the field day and right now with us. Thanks a lot, Peter.
Yeah, fun working with you.
Right on, Pete. And I'll pass it over to you, Liz.
All right. Well, thank you, Sam and Peter. The audience, I think, was following along great. There weren't many questions, but fantastic, fantastic work, folks. To everyone on Facebook, thank you so much for attending this live event today. If you want to rewatch or share with your friends, you can find the video of this event and many others on PFI's Facebook page, the Land Connections Facebook page, or our YouTube channels and websites. So please check them out there. We at PFI would also like to thank our major sponsors for their support of PFI's virtual field day season, of which this field day is a part. Their support helps make our virtual field day season possible, and it features over 60 virtual field days. You can attend all of those free of charge, and they're all recorded and available on our website. So thank you, sponsors. For those certified crop advisors in the audience, snap this QR code or email Cassidy at the Land Connection to receive your CEUs for today. I suspect she'll put her email address in the comment box as well, so you can get that. And we bid you farewell today, but in September 2021, we look forward to seeing you in person in the great state of Iowa. So please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation posted in the comment box. And for participating, you'll be entered to win some field day swag like the hat Sam is sporting. And more importantly, we'll receive your feedback. And if you'd like more information from past years of the Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day, or to get information for the next year, please visit our page on the Land Connections website. It's listed there. Again, thanks to Sam and Peter, and for all of you for joining us today. And until we see you next September, stay healthy, help your neighbors, and may the force be with you.